continue this conversation because Rosie looks sideways at you and I do, and we'll talk about politics at home in a minute. Let's talk about your view. He said, hey, Mr. Brennan, I mean, very interesting that both he and Edward Lucas said the only way to stop Putin is to keep supporting Ukraine because one step outside there and we're all at war with him. Can he be stopped? Is the West as weak as he says Vladimir Putin believes we are?
Some parts of the West are, not all of them. You need to look at how much money Poland and Finland have spent on their defence budgets, how much they've increased their defence budgets over the last couple of years to see that actually some countries are taking this seriously. And that is why I don't think, there is a lot of hyperbole about, what next, what could possibly be next. I don't think Russia is going to risk nuclear war over Estonia or anywhere like that. I think that Ukraine was a very specific issue because of, the history between the two countries and the regions in between the Donbass and actually how they used to see themselves. Perhaps not so much anymore, but certainly before then.
The USSR.
There's no getting away from the fact that actually a lot of people in the Donbass saw themselves as Russian and were very happy to be considered Russian until the war broke out. But the problem now for Ukraine, Mr. Breton Gordon was saying there that there is a chance, to push them back in the spring. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. The average age of a new conscript in Ukraine is 45 years old. That is too old, actually, to be building a force for another push, given the failure of the last one.
Are you saying that Ukraine's in a difficult position?
They're in an incredibly difficult position. What they need now is not the weapons to retake these territories that they've lost. They need the weapons to stop the Russian advance. Avdiivka has been a bloodbath, actually, and the way that it's managed to be sort of held back, actually, the silence that there has been on actually, because earlier on in the war, we saw lots of footage actually about how bad things were getting on the front lines. You haven't seen so much of that, but it has been just as bad as Bakhmut or anywhere else. The Ukrainians have had to pull out because they don't have enough ammunition, but they also don't have the manpower. They physically can't put enough soldiers in the field. And that, for a long time, we were saying, oh, Russia is losing more troops. And that was true for a very long time. But Ukraine is a significantly smaller country. So per head of the population, the Ukrainians are now losing that fight. What they need now is the ammunition to keep the Russians at bay, to stop them from actually having an advance of their own. And ultimately, there will have to now, I suspect, be a peace settlement. And I would say this, a lot of this is because we didn't arm the Ukrainians early enough. The United States, Germany, a lot of these countries, they bear responsibility for this. And right now that these conversations are being had about European and American funding for the Ukrainians, it is still an ongoing conversation. But there was a chance, I believe, to push the Russians back and for the Ukrainians to win back those territories. I think that's gone now. And it's simply a question of demographics now.
Interesting. Can I ask you very quickly? I will get there, Chair. US moves to block Israeli offences to Rafah. Biden flexing his muscles or playing politics?
Playing politics. I don't actually. The whole point of Israel is that the Jewish people do not have to rely on other actors, on other governments for their own safety. And I think that this is something that it plays very well to the gallery. But we've seen this actually from lots of different countries. Condemnation of Israel. We've seen it from a lot of other Arab nations.
Who do you think it plays well to?
I think it plays very well at home to his domestic audience, much in the same way as we've had Keir Starmer coming out now and saying there needs to be a ceasefire because we don't want to see massive, any more civilian casualties in Gaza. And that's because a lot of members of his party want this. In the US, the Democrats are split, actually. Lots of people are very anti-Israel, or certainly anti what Israel is doing. But Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't answer to the President of the United States. He answers to the Israeli public, and Israeli public opinion is with them because they were the people that were attacked. And we also have to remember that behind the scenes, even though they don't say this publicly because they can't, a lot of Arab countries have made it very clear to the Israelis, you do what you want to Hamas. They're not our friends. Actually, what we prioritize is stability in the region.
Yes.
For as long as Hamas exists, that's not going to happen. For as long as the Houthis
it's
and
really
Iran
important
are doing
to point
what
that
they want.
out. Hamas is not representative of so many of those Arab nations.
Absolutely. And once upon a time, there would have been the fear that the Egyptians would roll over the border or that the Syrians would. Absolutely none of them. Not even Hezbollah has actually gone all in and gone, yes, we're going to support them. There is no stomach for it outside of Gaza.
Benedict, pause right there, because I want to turn our attention to UK political news. And the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, yesterday accused the Post Office chair that she sacked of seeking revenge after he claimed over the weekend he'd been asked to delay compensation payments to postmasters ahead of the general election.
Have a listen.
Several serious allegations were made against the government, my department and its officials by Henry Staunton, the former chair of the Post Office, over the weekend. These allegations are completely false. It is so disappointing that he's chosen to spread a series of falsehoods, provide made-up anecdotes to journalists, and leak discussions held in confidence. All of this merely confirms in my mind that I made the correct decision in dismissing him. Mr. Staunton claimed that when he was first appointed as chair of the Post Office, he was told by a senior civil servant to stall on paying compensation. There is no evidence whatsoever that this is true.
Benedict, what's going on? Because they both can't be right.
They can't be right. But I think it's very interesting that Kemi Badenoch said there is no evidence that this is true. That doesn't necessarily mean that he wasn't told in a conversation not to do this. I think what's very interesting there is that when you listen to how Kemi Badenoch speaks, we were all sort of sat there going, oof, that's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Yes. That's why she's very popular, I suppose, amongst many members of the Tory party. But her suggestion that this is about Henry Staunton trying to get revenge, that you always get a bit of tit for tat, especially when somebody's been thrown under the bus, which is obviously how he feels, given how he.
Yeah, but she then threw in the bullying allegations. It became really personal.
It did become very personal, and a spokesperson for Mr. Staunton said that he is unaware of any bullying allegations, which, to be fair, he wouldn't necessarily be aware of. They were a sort of very embryonic stage. But I'm, inclined to think that Kemi Badenoch must be very firm on what the evidence must be, or the evidence, because otherwise, she risks lying to Parliament, saying things not
only that, we talked about this earlier, Rosie, didn't we? Not only lying to Parliament, but it's pretty obvious if you look at the Conservative Home website that she's the most popular person to be the next Tory leader. And I've been saying it all morning. Why would Kemi Badenoch, part of a cabinet, yes, with a man who's staring down the barrel of a massive defeat, even open her gob or put her foot in it, unless it was the cabal Nadine talks about, Nadine Dorries, they'd said to her, get out, this is a good moment. I can't see. Why would she lie here?
One of the major criticisms of Kemi Badenoch is that she's very lazy, but that doesn't take away from the fact that she is quite an astute politician, and I think she picks her moments well.
Who said that?
Oh, it's one of the major criticisms of her behind the scenes is that she's not across her briefs. She doesn't necessarily do the background work that she's supposed to. I suspect
probably end up in number 10 like Boris did.
As I've said to other people, that's not necessarily a block on you becoming PM, and it's frankly, if Rishi Sunak is across everything and able to do as badly as he's currently doing, well, then maybe that's not a bad thing. But she is somebody who has, I think, a very good nose for politics. She picks her moments of when to sort of launch her broadsides quite carefully. And you need to be able to do that if you want to be leader, because it is going to be a very cutthroat leadership contest when Rishi Sunak finally is pushed into the waiting car. Again, though, I'd say what she said there was that there is no evidence. That doesn't mean that a conversation didn't take place, but it does mean that perhaps Mr. Staunton won't be able to prove his claims, unless he does have some evidence, which you would have thought he would have already given to the press if that was the case. So she must feel that she's on pretty firm ground to be able to launch that kind of...
To be as forthright as she was,
exactly,
she's definitely painting the picture. She believes what she says, but so too did the Sunday Times article on the weekend as well. Benedict, thank you so much.
Thanks, Benedict.
Benedict Spence, political commentator.